Something unbelievable was happening in Atlanta. A name that had once been wrapped in both admiration and controversy was now being whispered again in powerful church circles. Prophet Brian Carn, yes, the same man once surrounded by scandals, prophecies, and media storms, was rumored to be stepping into one of the most influential pulpits in the Church of God in Christ. You won't believe it, but word was spreading that he might soon become the successor of a historic church that had shaped Atlanta's faith community for decades. The idea alone sounded impossible to many. How could someone who had been both celebrated and criticized be chosen for such a sacred position? But here was the shocking part. Inside sources claimed that the discussion was not just a rumor, it was a real possibility. People began to ask, how did this even happen? How did the same man once dragged into public debates find himself on the verge of taking leadership of one of the oldest Pentecostal movements in the country? Let me tell you, this was not a story that started in Atlanta. To understand what was unfolding, one had to go back to where it all began, in Jacksonville, Florida, where a young boy named Brian Carn first captured the attention of everyone around him. From an early age, his parents and church members said he had a rare gift. They claimed he could see things before they happened, speak words that touch people deeply, and read into situations in ways that felt supernatural. This was how it all began, with a child whose words carried the weight of prophecy. As a boy, Brian was unlike most children his age. While others played or dreamed about normal things, he was standing before congregations, speaking with confidence that seemed far beyond his years. Pastors from nearby towns began to invite him, curious to witness this boy prophet they had heard so much about. People would drive for hours just to see him, hoping he would say something that might change their lives. His name started spreading across the South, and before long, Brian wasn't just a church boy with a gift. He was a rising star. His voice carried passion, and his presence filled rooms with energy that made people believe they were witnessing something divine. This is where it gets interesting, because his rise was fast, almost too fast. By the time he reached his 20s, Brian had already preached at major conferences and appeared on Christian television. His boldness and confidence made him stand out in every crowd. He spoke about faith, hope, and destiny with the conviction of someone twice his age. But along with the fame came fire. Some admired him deeply, while others quietly began to question whether his gift was truly divine or if it was driven by ambition. Fame in the church world often came with a price. As his popularity grew, whispers followed. Some claimed that his prophecies were too perfect, too detailed, almost rehearsed. Others defended him fiercely, saying he was chosen and that his boldness was being misunderstood. Still, no one could deny that wherever he went, people filled the seats. They came to hear him speak, to witness something extraordinary. The craziest part was that even his critics couldn't ignore him. He was too magnetic, too confident, too unpredictable. Destiny took an unexpected turn when his name began to reach beyond pulpits and congregations. National Christian networks started featuring him. Invitations poured in from across the country. For a while, it seemed that nothing could slow down his momentum. But as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the shadows around him. Stories began to circulate, questions were raised, and a once celebrated prophet slowly became one of the most controversial figures in modern ministry. Yet through it all, Brian kept preaching, kept traveling, and kept believing that his story was far from over. He built his own ministry called Kingdom City Church and continued to draw thousands wherever he went. Some said he was destined for greatness. Others believed his downfall was only a matter of time. But what makes this story different is that no matter how many times his name was dragged through the mud, he somehow kept finding a way to rise again. And now, years later, that same name was being mentioned again, this time not in scandal, but in succession. It was unbelievable to many. The very man some had written off was now being talked about as the possible next leader of one of Atlanta's most powerful churches. The city that had birthed countless revivals and spiritual movements might soon welcome the most controversial prophet of this generation into its pulpit. But how did this moment come to be? What doors were opening behind closed meetings? And why were church leaders even considering such a move? The whispers grew louder as more people began to talk about what was happening behind the scenes. Some said it was destiny calling, while others called it manipulation in motion. Whatever it was, it had everyone talking. Brian Carn's name was no longer just trending among his followers. It was now echoing through the leadership circles of the Church of God in Christ. You won't believe how quickly this quiet rumor turned into a major topic of discussion among pastors and bishops across the country. Let me tell you, this is how the unexpected began to take shape. Behind closed doors, private meetings were reportedly taking place in Atlanta. The leadership of one of the most respected COGIC churches was discussing the future, and Carn's name was allegedly on the list of possible successors. For many, this was a shocking turn. It was almost unthinkable that a man who had faced such intense public criticism could now be trusted with one of the most powerful pulpits in the denomination. But here is the shocking part. According to several insiders, this was not just speculation. Some claim that the outgoing bishop himself had shown admiration for Carn's resilience and the way he rebuilt his ministry after years of controversy. This is where it gets interesting. Within the COGIC structure, leadership succession is a sacred process. It isn't just about talent or charisma, it's about legacy, doctrine, and spiritual authority. Positions like these aren't handed out easily. They are often decided through years of grooming, prayer, and private deliberations. But somehow, despite his history, Carn's name had found its way into the conversation. Some believed it was divine timing, while others saw it as a political move to attract younger believers and bring revival energy into a traditional church system that had been losing touch with the next generation. What makes this story different is the divide it created inside the denomination. On one side were the older conservative voices, men and women who had dedicated their lives to upholding the traditions of COGIC. To them, bringing in someone with a record of controversy felt like a betrayal of everything they had stood for. But on the other side were the younger members, people who had grown up watching Brian Carn online, listening to his fiery messages, and relating to his story of public failure and private redemption. They believed that if God could restore him, then surely he could lead again. The craziest part was how fast opinions shifted. Some church members began to express excitement about the idea, believing that Carn could bring new energy, fresh ideas, and a modern voice that would reignite the church's influence. Meanwhile, others feared that his arrival would spark division, attract negative media attention, and threaten the stability of a respected institution. Destiny took an unexpected turn once again, as even those who had once dismissed him started to reconsider. But here's where it got truly complicated. Rumors began to circulate that Carn himself had been spotted in Atlanta multiple times, quietly visiting the city without public announcements. He wasn't speaking openly about it, but those close to him noticed subtle changes. Fewer travel engagements, mysterious schedule shifts, and cryptic statements during his sermons that hinted at a new season of leadership. Some of his followers took it as a sign that something big was coming. Others thought he was simply teasing another revival. But those within the COGIC network began to connect the dots, and suddenly the whispers started sounding more like preparation than speculation. You won't believe what insiders were saying next, that the church's transition plan might already be in motion. Sources claim that within certain meetings, influential voices were supporting Carn's potential appointment, arguing that his redemption story could bring hope to the entire denomination. And let me tell you, this was how the narrative began to shift from rumor to reality. For the first time, the idea of Prophet Brian Carn leading one of Atlanta's most historic churches didn't sound impossible anymore. It sounded imminent. But here is the shocking part. As all this unfolded quietly behind closed doors, reactions began pouring in from across the country. Pastors, bishops, and even critics started weighing in. Some called it divine favor, while others warned that it could backfire disastrously. Either way, one thing was certain. The conversation had reached a level no one expected. And if what people were saying was true, then the next chapter in Brian Carn's story was about to shake the COGIC world like never before. As the days passed, the quiet rumor began to sound more like an unfolding reality. The whispers weren't just coming from Atlanta anymore. They were spreading across state lines, into other churches, prayer groups, and even online discussions. People couldn't stop talking about it. You won't believe how deep this story went once the truth started surfacing. Some were convinced that Brian Carn's appointment was already being planned, while others insisted it was nothing more than wishful thinking. But here is the shocking part. There were small signs everywhere that hinted something big was indeed in motion. Let me tell you, this is how things began to connect. Reports started emerging that a senior COGIC leader from Atlanta had been quietly seen at one of Carn's services in Charlotte. Witnesses claimed the two men had spoken privately afterward. Around the same time, members from the Atlanta church mentioned that a special guest had been attending meetings in the city, though no one officially confirmed who it was. The timing, the secrecy, and the pattern made it hard to dismiss. This was where it got interesting because nothing in the COGIC world happened by accident. Every leadership move was deliberate, planned, and protected from leaks. Yet, somehow, this one was slipping out. Inside the denomination, the conversation grew tense. Some bishops were pushing for fresh leadership to modernize the church, while others felt uneasy about welcoming someone with such a controversial past. The craziest part was how divided the responses became. Behind closed doors, heated discussions were reportedly taking place. Older leaders wanted stability, while the younger generation wanted a revival. And many saw Carn as that bridge between tradition and transformation. Destiny took an unexpected turn once again, as even some of his former critics started to admit that his growth and consistency in recent years had proven he was no longer the same man they once criticized. Meanwhile, in his sermons, Carn began dropping subtle clues. Without mentioning names or positions, he would speak about a new season of responsibility or the next level of assignment. To his followers, it sounded prophetic, as if he was preparing for something monumental. And though he never confirmed the Atlanta connection publicly, every message carried a deeper tone, one that hinted at transition, legacy, and purpose. What made this story different was how it blurred the lines between rumor and reality. Every time he preached, people listened closely, trying to decode his words for hidden meaning. But here's the shocking part. Not everyone was happy about it. Some members of the Atlanta church reportedly threatened to leave if the rumor turned out to be true. They worried that his presence would bring too much attention, that it would change the church's image and invite media chaos. Others, however, said that was exactly what the church needed: revival, boldness, and a leader unafraid of controversy. To them, Prophet Carn represented redemption in motion. He wasn't just another preacher, he was living proof that failure didn't have to be final. Behind the scenes, calls were being exchanged between church elders, trying to confirm what was really happening. Some leaders from outside Atlanta even expressed interest in meeting with Carn privately, wanting to understand his vision before making any judgments. It became clear that something was shifting. Whether people liked it or not, his name had re-entered the conversation at the highest levels of church leadership. Let me tell you, this is how destiny often worked. Quietly, unexpectedly, and in ways that no one saw coming. Every piece of this puzzle seemed to fit perfectly. His renewed reputation, his growing influence, and the timing of an aging bishop preparing to retire. The craziest part was that everything pointed to one conclusion, that Prophet Brian Carn might actually be standing at the doorway of his greatest opportunity yet. But before anyone could confirm what was truly going on, something even more surprising began to unfold. People who had once doubted him started speaking up in his defense. Prominent ministers who had distanced themselves years ago were suddenly praising his maturity and humility. Even members of the media who had previously reported negatively about him began calling this moment a potential spiritual comeback. It was almost as if the world was preparing for a redemption story, one that no one thought possible. Still, one question hung in the air like a cloud no one could ignore. Was this truly divine restoration? Or just another setup for a public storm? As the tension in Atlanta grew thicker, every move, every word, and every silence from Prophet Carn seemed to carry meaning. People watched closely, waiting for the next sign, the next hint, the next confirmation. The storm of speculation had reached its peak. Everywhere you looked, social media, church circles, even Christian news outlets, people were talking about Prophet Brian Carn and the possible leadership shift in Atlanta. What had started as a whisper had now become a national discussion. You won't believe how far this story traveled. Even leaders outside the COGIC denomination began weighing in on it. Some called it a divine comeback, while others warned it was a dangerous move that could backfire. But here is the shocking part. No one could ignore the fact that something powerful was unfolding. Whether people agreed or not, it seemed destiny had brought Brian Carn back to the center of attention once again. Let me tell you, this is how the story began to twist even more. Inside the Atlanta church, members were divided. Meetings were held, discussions took place, and people started choosing sides. Some felt excitement building in the atmosphere, a belief that revival was coming and that Carn's presence could bring a fresh wave of energy that would fill the church with new life. Others, however, felt uneasy, afraid that the move might cause more harm than good. The craziest part was that even among those who had doubts, there was a strange sense that something greater was at work. It felt like history was preparing to repeat itself, a fallen man being lifted again for a greater purpose. Behind the pulpit, Brian continued to preach as if nothing had changed, but his messages carried more weight than ever before. He spoke about seasons of testing, divine timing, and how God often uses rejection as preparation. His tone had shifted. It was calmer, wiser, almost prophetic in itself. Listeners could feel that he was speaking from experience, not theory. What makes the story different is that every trial he once faced now seemed to serve a bigger purpose. His words carried power because they were born from pain. And while others had counted him out, he was quietly proving that brokenness could still birth greatness. Destiny took an unexpected turn when reports surfaced that the final decision regarding the new church leader was approaching. The board of elders was set to meet, and though no official names were released, all signs pointed toward one direction. Many believed this was it, the moment when the man once rejected would finally be restored. And even though nothing had been publicly confirmed, the anticipation was undeniable. Atlanta was buzzing with energy. Pastors from other states planned to visit just to witness what might happen next. But here's the shocking part. Prophet Carn remained completely silent about the rumors. No public statements, no confirmations, just a calm confidence that spoke louder than words. That silence made people even more curious. Some said it was wisdom. Others said it was strategy. Whatever it was, it worked. His silence became his strongest message, one that said, "You can talk about me, but you can't stop what's meant for me." And that message resonated deeply with thousands of people who had followed his journey from rejection to resilience. Let me tell you, this is how redemption stories are written. Not in perfect lives, but in broken pieces that somehow form a masterpiece. The craziest part is that whether he takes that pulpit or not, Prophet Brian Carn had already won something greater, the power to redefine his own legacy. He showed that no controversy, no criticism, and no past mistake could erase what destiny had already written. And as Atlanta waited for the official announcement, one thing became crystal clear. This story was no longer about scandal or doubt. It was about grace, second chances, and the mysterious way God restores what the world tries to throw away. As the final whispers faded into expectation, the question that once divided everyone now united them in curiosity. What happens next? Would this be the moment of full redemption or the beginning of another storm? No one knew for sure, but one thing everyone agreed on: Prophet Brian Carn's story was far from over. Because in a world that rarely forgives, his rise from controversy to potential leadership wasn't just news, it was living proof that destiny, no matter how delayed, always finds its way back home.